EVO.
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everybody, today we're going to do something a little different. Usually we have a list or put a price tag on some rare and weird collectibles.
But it's October, so we're going to dedicate the next few episodes to Halloween. We'll give you a little mystery, a little history, and we'll talk about candy and costumes and movies, and of course, murder.
Hi, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Jeff. Welcome to Taboo Treasures, a weekly podcast that explores the human obsession with objects of extreme rarity and infamy.
Today's episode, an introduction to Halloween. Halloween was originally called Samhain, and it was first celebrated by the Celts about 5,000 years ago on the 31st of October. They thought of this time of year as the changing of the seasons from light to dark or summer to winter.
They believed there was a veil that separated the living and the dead, and they thought that during this changeover of the seasons, the veil was at its thinnest. So to protect themselves, they lit bonfires and wore costumes because they thought that would be the way to ward off evil spirits. Making sweet food was also part of it because we don't know why that was part of it.
And then along came the Christians. Christian officials known for their bossiness didn't want them to start practicing non-Christian festivals, so they hijacked it. Instead of warding off spirits, Pope Gregory III made up a bunch of holidays around the same time that celebrated what he wanted to celebrate.
Yeah, it's really simple. First, they celebrated that November 1st would be called All Saints' Day, which would celebrate Christian martyrs and saints. Then the second became All Souls' Day to remember the souls of the dead. All Saints' Day became All Hallows' Day, and then the previous day, October 31st, became All Hallows' Eve, which eventually ended up being called Halloween.
Yeah, anyway, the church lost that one. People kept celebrating Halloween with bonfires, costumes, treats, and a focus on spirits of the dead. Other major religions have their own beef with Halloween. It isn't permitted in Judaism because it's a non-Jewish holiday, but they're happy observing Yitzkor, which is a prayer for the dead. It's vaguely similar to some Christian Halloween-related stuff, but we're guessing with much better food. And most American Jews celebrate Halloween.
Islam forbids Halloween because Islam forbids pretty much everything that's fun, including candy, probably. And Hindus have their own thing. They're worried that celebrating Halloween started to have a negative effect on their indigenous festivals. In other words, they're afraid of candy too.
So unfortunately for Pope Gregory III, but happily for the 1,500 spirit Halloween stores that will eventually spring up across North America, it didn't work, and All Saints' Day even evolved into the modern-day holiday of trick-or-treating. The way it worked in the beginning was that if a starving person prayed for a rich stranger's dead relative, the rich stranger would give them a thing called a soul cake, which was basically a little biscuit.
Yeah, I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something deeply troubling about that. Anyway, then kids go to their own version of begging rich people for things. It was called guising, and they didn't use disguises, so your guess is as good as ours, but it was their version of going door to door. They'd perform a song or joke or poem in exchange for a treat, sort of like dogs, except when dogs grow up, they don't eat you.
Around the same time, a legend sprang up about an Irish guy called Stingy Jack who tricked the devil a bunch of times. You'd think he'd get some kind of props for that, but for some mysterious ways or something, he couldn't even get into hell, much less heaven. So he was condemned to wander the earth forever with only a burning coal inside a carved-out turnip for light.
That's where the carving tradition started, but pumpkins replaced turnips because, as we all know from experience, it's much easier to carve a pumpkin. Then someone came up with the idea of pumpkin spice, so every fall about half of the people in the world, including me, want to die.
Oh, fuck you! Pumpkin
Yeah.
Halloween as we know it was brought to America from Europe by the early settlers. Here's a partial list of some of the other things that the early settlers brought to America from Europe. And this is true.
smallpox, measles, influenza, typhus, cholera, diphtheria, scarlet fever, and yellow fever. That was generous of them. Since the Native Americans who lived here had never been exposed to these diseases, they haven't developed any immune response yet. The results were catastrophic, but that was centuries ago.
Oh yeah, now we've evolved into a kinder, more humane and inclusive society that recognizes the value of all human life. So we've totally embraced the Native American community and everyone's hugging and laughing. The new and improved Halloween that started here spread around the world because we like to spread things around the world, like destabilizing foreign governments and crashing countries' economies. But it took something else to really transform Halloween, a force greater than any one country could possibly contain: Hollywood.
Because of his association with dark, spooky, and undead stuff, Halloween became the go-to holiday for the release of most horror films and television shows. And no movie did more to bring Halloween into the cultural zeitgeist than the movie Halloween in 1978. It changed the public image of Halloween from a night for kids to dress up in silly costumes to a night of pure terror.
Yeah, it was such an extraordinary moment in the history of film and American culture that actually we've decided to dedicate a whole episode to it. But before we end this section, we want to give a shout out to Halloween's Mexican cousin, Dia de los Muertos, or the Day of the Dead, which comes at the same time of year. There's every kind of symbol of death you can imagine all over the place. There's skeletons, skeleton masks, coffins, and stuff like that, but it's way cooler.
Halloween focuses on the dark and grim aspects of death and scary beings like witches and devils and hot nurses. Dia de los Muertos is a joyous celebration of the connection between the living and the dead, as well as life after death. Of course, like pretty much everything eventually does, Halloween has evolved into a massive corporate retail machine that the U.S. alone took in more than $11 billion in 2024. That's a lot of fucking candy corn.
I know. Speaking of candy corn, Jesus, who eats candy corn? It was originally marketed as chicken feed, so it would sound rustic, which we know because we do this podcast.
Anyway, somehow, despite no one on earth being able to stand it, it still survived since the 1880s, and you still can't get away from it on Halloween.
Okay.
Who eats this shit?
Don't judge. Yeah. I like candy corn.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid I liked it, but not when it got hard. It needed to be like soft and mushy.
That's true. If you left it in your Halloween bag overnight, it was pretty much chalk.
Yeah, you had to eat it right away.
But it's good. Well, more people like it than are willing to admit it, because how is a candy going to stay in existence for 140 years if nobody eats it?
Tradition.
Yeah, I think we should ask our listeners to let us know if they like candy corn.
I remember it just being raw in my bag. It wasn't even in a plastic thing. It was just,
that's right.
Just raw. You go to somebody's house, just a handful of fucking candy corn into your bag.
Oh my God.
Like, just eat the stuff that was wrapped.
Well, speaking of trick-or-treating and wrapping candy, there's a lot of danger and worry about kids literally taking candy from strangers.
Yeah, there's a thing called Halloween sadism. It's the act of doing things like poisoning candy or putting sharp objects like needles and bits of broken razor blades in fruit and that sort of thing. When I was a kid, my mom warned me of that.
Yeah.
So it's understandable that a lot of parents are freaked out and inspecting everything their kids bring home for signs of tampering.
Yeah, this has been a problem since the early 60s, but like so many things, it's gotten much worse over the last 20 years or so. Except, nope. More bullshit.
Yeah. A sociologist named Joel Bess and his team went back through decades of reporting from major newspapers like the New York Times and the LA Times, and they found no credible reports of any tampering. Most of the cases that made the headlines were either hoaxes or accidents.
There have been some instances of kids getting dinged by, kind of minor stuff that sounds much worse than it is. Like one kid got pricked by a needle, but it was minor and he didn't even need medical attention. The number of actual cases of a kid being seriously injured or killed by candy they got trick-or-treating was 0.
Yeah, it kind of makes sense because fears about Halloween candy spike in years when there are particularly disturbing crimes or events. For example, in 1982, the Tylenol poisoning, which we talked about earlier, scared parents into worrying their kids were being poisoned. And then after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, some parents even avoided taking children to Halloween events at malls because of fears of another terrorist bombing. But none of that has any connection to facts.
Yeah, so why does this stuff persist? Why do you think? It doesn't matter to social and legacy media that there are no verified incidents of candy tampering. They just bark out lists of safety precautions every year, like, the local news, warning parents to inspect treats for signs of tampering. Just hearing the repeated warnings helps keep the fear alive, even though it's completely made up.
Yeah, in 1988, the New York Times reported that strychnine had been found in a batch of sun-kissed fruit candy. But no, it was cornstarch.
Yeah. In 2015 Facebook post, which is where everybody should get their news, they said ecstasy pills shaped like Halloween candy were being given out to children. The post went viral. It got picked up by news outlets, even though not one actual case was confirmed.
Yeah, and the same thing in 2022.
And tonight, the DEA has a new warning for parents about fentanyl.
They say pills on the streets can look like candy, but they're not. It's called rainbow fentanyl, and it's raising concerns about the fentanyl crisis already impacting communities across our state.
Again, when it was all over, there wasn't a single report of fentanyl-laced candy.
And then there's pot edibles, and I'm not sure what the big deal is about this one. If anything, parents should be grateful for something to bring their kids down from their sugar rushes. But no.
And supposedly some urgent care centers even offer to X-ray candy, which is pretty great. You can picture this line of parents with little orange buckets and bats on them waiting to see the doctor, hoping to get a lollipop or something. I don't know if it's true either, but apparently you can Google your trick-or-treat route to see if anyone is on the convicted pedophile registry. Oh, my God. It wouldn't be surprising, but again, of course, there's never been a single report of a kid being molested while they're trick-or-treating, and sex crimes do not go up on Halloween. The funny thing is that there are actually some increased risks on Halloween, and they don't get much press because Halloween sadism gets more clicks. According to a study published by Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Reports, which sounds like a fun read, children are 4 times more likely to be hit by a car on Halloween than any other night of the year, which kind of makes sense.
You got millions of children roaming the streets after dark, and half the time they can barely see out of their masks. Getting hit by a car is a much more real concern. And then there's some really nasty things that Halloween brings out in some people. For example, some animal shelters actually pause black cat adoptions in October because human beings are assholes and some of them like to abuse black cats around Halloween.
Yeah, there are dozens of different black cat superstitions, and a lot of them actually say black cats are good luck. But if you're one of the many people who do think black cats are evil, go fuck yourself. They're cats. You can actually have a specific phobia of Halloween, and it has a name because, of course, it does. Remember Samhain we told you about, the original beginnings of Halloween? Well, there's Samhain phobia. It's an extreme and irrational fear of costumes and decorations, and of course, if you suffer from Samhain phobia, Halloween is probably the least of your problems.
Yeah, speaking of costumes, in 2013, Julianne Hogue from Dancing with the Stars, and About as White as You Can Get, dressed as Crazy Eyes, who's a black character from Orange is the New Black. So naturally, she darkened her skin and got a ton of shit and had to apologize because there was no way she could have chosen that character because she thought she was cool and wanted to give her a Halloween shout out.
Heidi Klum dressed as Hindu goddess Kali. Hindu leaders took it as a gesture of admiration and thanked her for bringing an awareness of the goddess Kali to the Western world. No, they did not. So we defended the last two, but Prince Harry got what was coming to him for showing up at a party in a Nazi uniform with a swastika armband.
Idiot.
He got blasted for it and had to crawl all over the place on his knees begging to be forgiven.
And Hilary Duff and Jason Walsh wore costumes that referenced the forced colonization of indigenous people at the same time Native Americans were protesting the Dakota Access Pipeline. So, of course, since their costumes were not only respectful but actually supportive of the history and ongoing struggles of Native Americans and white culture, she was forced to say her costume wasn't properly thought through and forced to apologize. Ashley Tisdale got dinged for cultural appropriation for using makeup that was inspired by Dia de los Muertos.
Yeah, she was accused of sexualizing the holiday and its scary imagery. What is wrong with fucking people?
I know.
Say what you will about mocking tragedies and sensitive topics, but if you want to exercise your First Amendment right to criticize someone for a Halloween costume, you better believe they have the First Amendment right to wear it. If you don't remember Cecil the Lion, Cecil was a beloved lion in Zimbabwe that was killed by a hunter. Ashley Benson got shit for wearing a costume inspired by Cecil. Why?
Oh, by the way, I remember Cecil the Lion because of this Google thing. In 2015, the year he was killed, more people searched on Cecil the Lion than Iran nuclear threat or water on Mars. You decide what that means. But by far our favorite is when Shaun White, the Olympic snowboarder, dressed up as Simple Jack from Tropic Thunder and got yelled at on social media. If you don't know who Simple Jack is, you should watch Tropic Thunder, which you should have seen by now anyway.
Yes, bravo, Sean, we say, never go full retard, says Carl Lazarus.
So do any of you listening actually like candy corn?
Love it or hate it, let us know by writing to us at Taboo Treasures on Instagram or TikTok, or email us at tabootreasures@evocreative.com. So now that we're done with the trick-or-treating and all the costumes, we're going to get to the fun stuff. In 1957, on Halloween, Peter Fabiano and his wife Betty were getting ready to call it a night after a long day of trick-or-treaters. But around 11 p.m., the doorbell rang. Peter opened the door expecting to see some late-night trick-or-treaters, but as he stood in the doorway, he's immediately shot in the chest. The trick-or-treaters run away into the dark. His wife tries to help him, but he dies on the front porch.
And almost immediately, the investigation started turning up clues that made it look like a premeditated murder, not some random act of Halloween violence. First, they found out that there was a rumor that Fabiano's wife, Betty, had been having an affair with a photographer friend of theirs named Joan Ray Bell. Then they found the gun that had been used, and they traced it back to a woman named Goldine Pizer.
Yeah, the breakthrough came when they found out that Joan and Goldine knew each other. Goldine was a strange loner who had a crush on Joan. Joan wanted Fabiano dead so she could have Betty all to herself. So she acted like she was into Goldine and manipulated her into thinking they should kill Fabiano because he was abusive to her friend Betty.
So first Joan gets Goldine to buy a gun, and then she led her on and told her she'd be with her if she'd do the murder. So Goldine actually did pull the trigger, and later she admitted that she did it for Joan because she loved her. They both avoided the possibility of the death penalty by pleading guilty to second-degree murder, and they ended up getting only 5 years to life, which meant they'd be eligible for parole after only 5 years, and they both were eventually released.
Quentin Patrick and his girlfriend were at home on Halloween night in 2008, and they probably weren't high on sugar. Patrick was a drug dealer, and he was paranoid that a rival gang was out for revenge. So he kept an AK-47 rifle within reach. But this was no ordinary civilian gun. It had been modified to work like a fully automatic rifle. In other words, it was a machine gun capable of firing more than 600 rounds per minute with a single pull of the trigger.
And that same night, a 12-year-old kid named T.J. Darasaw was coming home from a party with his family, and they decided to trick-or-treat at a few houses on the way. They stopped at Patrick's house because the porch light was on, which usually means they're up for trick-or-treaters. So TJ and his two brothers jumped out of the family van wearing these ghoulish masks, and they ran toward the house with their dad right behind. TJ got to the porch before them because he wanted to be the first in line for candy, and he started knocking on the door.
But inside the house, Patrick's girlfriend heard the Darasaw van pull up. And when she peeked out the window, she started screaming to Patrick that there were 3 men in masks charging towards the house. Patrick was already amped up about the rival gang, and the drugs probably didn't help. He grabbed the machine gun and emptied its 30-round magazine through the front door. TJ's father and 9-year-old brother were hit but survived, and the third brother wasn't hit. But being first in line, TJ was shot 11 times and died.
So yeah, Patrick opens the door and steps over TJ's body, realizes he wasn't shooting at gang members. Then he ran back inside, passing his screaming 2-year-old daughter to put down the gun. Patrick eventually surrendered to the police, and he only got 16 years.
On another Halloween night in 1970, a 16-year-old girl named Shirley Lynette Ledford was hitchhiking home from a party in Burbank, California. But this was definitely not the night to go hitchhiking. A passing van stopped for her and opened the door. She didn't realize she was about to take a ride in a van that the two men inside, Lawrence Bittaker and Ray Norris, had nicknamed the Murder Mac.
By that night, Bittaker and Norris had already kidnapped, tortured, raped, and murdered 4 women in Southern California in less than 7 months. The press called them the Toolbox Killers. They drove her to a secluded mountain area where they raped, tortured, and murdered her. And the murder was particularly gruesome, involving pliers, a sledgehammer, and strangulation.
They dumped her body on a random neighborhood lawn, and at first people thought it was a Halloween decoration. The only reason the killers were ever caught is because they confided in a friend who notified the police. Bittaker and Norris audiotaped the last 17 minutes of the murder, including Ledford begging over and over again for them to let her die. It brought the courtroom to tears during the trial.
Norris pleaded guilty and testified against Bittaker to get life instead of the death penalty. And Bittaker did get the death penalty, but he died in prison in 2019 before the sentence was carried out. Norris died in prison also in 2020. We mentioned some of the bullshit urban legends about apples full of razor blades and fentanyl candy and that stuff, but there is one horrible poisoning story that really happened, the case of Ronald Clark O'Brien.
O'Brien and his wife Daneen had an 8-year-old son named Timothy and a 5-year-old girl named Elizabeth. On Halloween 1974, they were having dinner with their friend Jim Bates, his wife, and kids. When they finished up, O'Brien and Bates took the kids out trick-or-treating.
At one house, when no one answered the door, the group moved on, but O'Brien kind of held back for a little while. When he joined up with them again, he was showing off 5 huge 22-inch pixie sticks. He said he got them from a neighbor he'd run into.
He gave each of the kids one of the giant straws. One to Bates' daughter and another to a 10-year-old boy from O'Brien's church, who they saw when they were out trick-or-treating. Before bed that night, O'Brien told Timothy and Elizabeth they could each pick one last piece of candy. Timothy was all about the big pixie stick. It didn't occur to a little 8-year-old boy that there was anything weird about the fact that it was being held closed by a staple.
So he gets it open and starts pouring that pixie sticks powder in his mouth, but he stopped because he said it tasted weird, so his dad gave him a little Kool-Aid to wash it down. And later, a detective with the police department in Pasadena, Texas, named Bill Lanier, got a call from the hospital saying a little boy had been rushed in, but he was already dead when the paramedics arrived.
When the cops questioned O'Brien, he told them Timothy was having stomach pains and started vomiting, and then he just went limp. Lanier said O'Brien didn't really seem all that freaked out at the time, but at that point there was no reason to think he was involved. But O'Brien was on police radar. They found out he had 21 jobs over the past 10 years, and he was about $100,000 in debt, and that he had taken out $60,000 worth of life insurance on both of his kids.
They questioned him about which house they got the candy from, but at first he kept saying he didn't know which house, and he said he didn't even know which street, which was weird because they had only trick-or-treated on 2 streets. Then he said he didn't see the person who gave him the candy at all, just his arm.
Then, out of nowhere, O'Brien seemed to have an epiphany. He blamed it on a neighbor, but it turned out the neighbor wasn't home that night and the lights in his house were off. Things started to unravel pretty fast from there. The cops found an adding machine tape with numbers that came out to almost the exact amount of the policies. They found out that O'Brien called the insurance company the next day to find out how to file a claim.
Master criminal. His community college teacher said he kept asking about poisons like cyanide. And the police questioned a clerk at a chemical supply company, and sure enough, he said a man had come in the night before Halloween to buy cyanide, but he left when he told him they only sold in bulk. The clerk remembered the man because he was wearing some kind of beige or blue smock, like something a doctor might wear, and O'Brien was an optician, and that's exactly what he wore to work.
The case was so open and shut that in October of 1975, a jury convicted him of 1 count of capital murder and 4 counts of attempted murder in 46 minutes. Fortunately, the other kids had survived because they couldn't get the pixie sticks open. On March 31st, 1984, O'Brien got a government hotshot while hundreds of people gathered outside in costumes shouting, "Trick or treat."
This is one of those cases that really cemented the poison candy scaremongering. And of course, the authorities didn't exactly do anything to calm anybody down. They'd tell parents that if anything looked strange, to bring it to them. So, of course, they ended up with a room full of perfectly fine candy. Goodbye, Halloween as we knew it.
Well, thanks for listening to our latest episode of Taboo Treasures, dedicated to the month of October and Halloween. And want to tell us about some candy or costume stories you got? Please reach out to us at
Taboo Treasures on Instagram and TikTok, or you can email us at tabootreasures@evocreative.com.
Goodbye. From Evio, Taboo Treasures is produced by Bruce Whitkin and Jeff Levine. Executive producer Brandon Morgan. Music by the Lonely Bulls.